street vendor struggling to make ends meet gets help from Messi. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The sun had barely begun to peek over the horizon when Mateo set out, his fruit cart rattling over the uneven cobblestones. The streets of Barcelona were still quiet, the only sounds being the distant hum of traffic and the rhythmic clack of his cart's wheels. Mateo liked this time of day. It gave him a few precious moments of peace before the city awoke and the daily struggle began. As he walked, he mentally prepared himself for the day ahead. He knew it would be tough, as it always was. Selling fruit on the streets was a hard life, a constant battle to make enough money to support his family. But Mateo was a fighter. He had to be, for his wife and his 2 young children who depended on him. He reached his usual spot, a busy corner near a metro station, and began to set up his cart. He arranged his fruit with care, making sure the colorful array of apples, oranges, and bananas looked as inviting as possible. He took pride in his produce. It was always fresh and of the highest quality. Even if his cart was small and his prices were low, he believed in providing value to his customers. As the morning rush began, Mateo started calling out to the passers-by, his voice carrying over the growing noise of the city. Fresh fruit. Ripe and delicious. Come and get your fruit here. Some people glanced his way, but most hurried past, too engrossed in their own lives to pay him much attention. Mateo was used to this. He knew that to many, he was invisible, just another street vendor trying to scrape by. Some even looked down on him, as if his work was beneath them. But Mateo never let it get to him. He knew the value of honest work, no matter how humble it might seem. As the day wore on and the sun climbed higher in the sky, Mateo continued to call out, even as his voice grew hoarse. He wiped the sweat from his brow and kept smiling, greeting every potential customer with warmth and respect, whether they bought from him or not. But despite his efforts, sales were slow. By midday, he had only sold a handful of pieces, barely enough to cover the cost of his stock. Worry gnawed at him. If things didn't improve, he wouldn't have enough to bring home to his family. Just as despair began to creep in, a man approached his cart. He was dressed simply, in a plain t-shirt and jeans, and he walked with an unassuming air. Mateo greeted him as he did every customer, with a tired but genuine smile. Good afternoon, senor, he said. How can I help you today? I have the freshest, most delicious fruit in all of Barcelona. The man returned his smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I'm sure you do, he said. I'll take a look. As the man began to examine the fruit, Mateo couldn't shake the feeling that there was something familiar about him. But he couldn't quite place it, until the man looked up and met his gaze directly. Mateo's eyes widened. He knew that face. He had seen it countless times, on television, on billboards, on the front pages of newspapers. Standing in front of him, casually selecting an apple, was none other than Lionel Messi, the greatest footballer in the world. For a moment, Mateo was speechless. Of all the people to stop at his cart, he never imagined it would be Lionel Messi. The man was a legend, a hero to millions around the world. And here he was, standing in front of Mateo like any other customer. Messi, if he noticed Mateo's shock, didn't show it. He continued to browse the fruit, picking up an orange and examining it thoughtfully. You have a good selection here, he said. How long have you been doing this? Mateo found his voice. For about 5 years now, senor. Ever since I lost my job at the factory. Messi nodded, sympathy in his eyes. Times are tough. It's not easy to make a living these days. No, senor, it's not, Mateo agreed. But we do what we must for our families, don't we? Indeed we do, Messi said. He paused, then asked, how much for everything on your cart? Mateo blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Everything, senor? Yes, Messi confirmed. I'll take it all. Mateo hesitated. This was more fruit than one person could possibly need. "Senor, that's too much for one person," he said uncertainly. But Messi just smiled, that gentle, understanding smile that seemed to light up his whole face. "It's for you," he said. "You work hard. You deserve this." With that, he pulled out a wad of cash and handed it to Mateo. Mateo's hands trembled as he took it. He didn't even need to count it to know it was more, far more, than the total price of his stock. Tears welled up in Mateo's eyes. This money, it was enough to cover months of expenses. It was enough to give him a break from the constant, grinding worry of how he would provide for his family. "Senor, I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Messi placed a hand on Mateo's shoulder, his touch firm and reassuring. "You're welcome," he said simply. "Keep doing what you're doing. The world needs more people like you." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Mateo standing there, clutching the money, tears streaming down his face. He watched as Messi disappeared into the crowd, feeling as though he had just experienced a miracle. And in a way, he had. Because what Messi had given him was more than just money. It was hope. It was the knowledge that his hard work and dedication had been seen and valued by someone. And not just anyone, by Lionel Messi, a man who was a symbol of excellence and achievement to the entire world. Mateo looked down at the money in his hands. It was more than he had ever held at one time. But he knew, with a sudden, fierce certainty, that he wouldn't keep it all for himself. He would use it to help others, just as Messi had helped him. With a deep breath, Mateo began to pack up his cart. For the first time in a long time, he felt a lightness in his heart. The future, which had always seemed so uncertain and daunting, now held a glimmer of promise. As he walked home, he thought of his family and how he couldn't wait to tell them about this incredible day. But more than that, he thought about tomorrow. Because tomorrow, he knew, would be a new beginning. The next morning, Mateo woke up with a newfound sense of purpose. The events of the previous day still felt like a dream, but the money in his pocket was a tangible reminder that it had all been real. He kissed his wife and children goodbye and set out for his usual spot, pushing his cart with a spring in his step. But as he approached the corner, he stopped short, his eyes widening in surprise. There was a crowd gathered around his usual spot. Not just a few people, but dozens of them, all seeming to be waiting for something. Or someone. As Mateo drew closer, he began to hear the murmur of excited voices. "Is it true?" someone was asking. "Did Messi really buy all his fruit?" "I heard he gave him a fortune," another voice chimed in. "Enough to change his life." Mateo felt a sudden rush of nerves. He hadn't expected this. He had thought yesterday's interaction with Messi would be a private thing, a special moment just between the two of them. But it seemed that news had spread. And now, all these people were here, waiting for him. Taking a deep breath, Mateo pushed his cart into the midst of the crowd. Immediately, all eyes turned to him. There was a moment of hushed silence, and then the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Mateo was stunned. Never in his life had he been greeted with such enthusiasm, such appreciation. People were smiling at him, reaching out to shake his hand, asking him to tell them about his experience with Messi. And as he began to talk, haltingly at first, but then with growing confidence, he saw something else in their eyes. It wasn't just curiosity or excitement. It was respect. For the first time, these people weren't looking through him as if he were invisible. They were seeing him, really seeing him, as a person with a story, with dreams and struggles just like their own. As the day went on, Mateo sold more fruit than he ever had in a single day. People were buying from him not just because of his association with Messi, but because they wanted to support him, to show him that his hard work mattered. By the end of the day, Mateo's cart was empty and his pockets were full. But more than that, his heart was full. Full of gratitude, full of hope, full of a new sense of his own worth and dignity. As he walked home that evening, he thought about how one act of kindness could ripple outwards, touching so many lives. Messi's generosity hadn't just changed Mateo's life, it had inspired others to see the value in people they might have overlooked or dismissed. And Mateo knew that this was just the beginning. He had been given a gift, not just of money but of influence. He had a platform now, a chance to make a difference in his community. He thought of all the other street vendors he knew, all the hard-working people struggling to make ends meet. He wanted to help them, to show them that they mattered, just as Messi had shown him. With a smile on his face and a fire in his heart, Mateo began to plan. Tomorrow would be a new day, and he was ready to face it. Ready to use his newfound influence to spread a little more kindness in the world, one fruit at a time. In the days and weeks that followed, Mateo's life underwent a transformation. His once quiet corner became a hub of activity, with people coming from all over the city to buy fruit from the vendor who had been touched by Messi's kindness. But Mateo didn't let the attention go to his head. Instead, he used his newfound platform to make a difference. He started by reaching out to other street vendors, offering them support and advice. He shared his story with them, encouraging them to keep going even when times were tough. Some of the vendors were skeptical at first. They had been on the streets for years, facing the same daily struggles as Mateo. They couldn't believe that one chance encounter could change anything. But Mateo persisted. He invited them to join him at his spot, to see for themselves the difference that a little bit of hope could make. And slowly but surely, they began to come around. Together, they formed a sort of informal cooperative. They pooled their resources, buying fruit in bulk to get better prices. They took turns watching each other's carts, giving each other breaks throughout the long days. And they talked, sharing their stories and their dreams. They discovered that they had more in common than they ever realized. They were all fighting the same battle, all striving for the same goal, to create a better life for themselves and their families. As their little community grew, so did their impact. They started attracting the attention of local media, who were drawn to the story of the street vendors who were working together to overcome adversity. And with that attention came even more customers. People came not just to buy fruit, but to show their support, to be a part of something bigger than themselves. Mateo watched it all with a sense of awe and gratitude. He knew that none of this would have been possible without Messi's act of kindness. But he also knew that it was about more than just one man's generosity. It was about the power of community, the strength that comes from standing together. It was about the dignity of work, the value of every person's contribution, no matter how small. And it was about hope. The hope that had been ignited in Mateo's heart that day, and that was now spreading like wildfire, lighting up the lives of everyone it touched. As the months passed, Mateo's life settled into a new rhythm. He was still selling fruit, still working hard every day. But now, he was part of something bigger. He had a purpose, a mission. And every morning, when he set out with his cart, he did so with a smile on his face and a spring in his step. Because he knew that he wasn't just selling fruit anymore. He was selling hope. One piece at a time. 1 year later, Mateo stood at his corner, setting up his cart for the day. The streets were just starting to come alive with the hustle and bustle of the morning commute, but Mateo was already wide awake and ready to go. As he arranged his colorful display of fruits, he couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed in the past year. The day Lionel Messi had come to his cart and bought all his fruit had been a turning point, a moment that had altered the trajectory of his life in ways he never could have imagined. Now, his corner was a well-known spot, not just in his neighborhood but across the city. People came from far and wide to buy from him, not only because of his connection to Messi, but because they knew they would always get quality fruit and friendly service. But it wasn't just his own life that had changed. The little community of street vendors that had formed around him had grown and thrived. They were no longer just a group of individuals struggling to get by, but a true support system, a family. Together, they had faced challenges and celebrated triumphs. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative. And through it all, they had held onto the hope and the sense of purpose that Mateo had found that fateful day. As Mateo was lost in his thoughts, a familiar figure approached his cart. Mateo looked up and his eyes widened. It was Lionel Messi, dressed casually as he had been a year ago, a warm smile on his face. "Senor Messi!" Mateo exclaimed, coming around from behind his cart to greet him. "What a surprise!" Messi shook Mateo's hand warmly. "I was in the neighborhood and I thought I'd stop by, see how you were doing." Mateo beamed. "I'm doing well, senor." "Very well. And it's all thanks to you." Messi waved a hand dismissively. No. It's thanks to your own hard work and determination. I just gave you a little push." But Mateo shook his head. "It was more than a little push, senor. It was a lifeline. A miracle." Messi's eyes softened. "I'm glad I could help. But what you've done with that help, the way you've paid it forward, that's the real miracle." Mateo felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. "I've tried my best, senor. To use the gift you gave me to make a difference." "And you have," Messi said firmly. "I've heard about what you and your fellow vendors have been doing. You've created something special here, something that's making a real impact." Mateo nodded, too choked up to speak. Messi placed a hand on his shoulder, just as he had a year ago. "Keep up the good work, my friend," he said. "You're an inspiration. To me, and to so many others." With that, Messi turned and walked away, blending into the bustling crowd. Mateo watched him go, his heart full to bursting. He turned back to his cart, ready to start another day. Another day of hard work, of serving his community, of spreading hope. Another day in the life of an ordinary man who had been touched by greatness and who had chosen to become great in his own way. As he called out to the passers-by, his voice strong and clear, Mateo knew that this was his calling. This was his legacy. And he would spend the rest of his days living up to it, one fruit, one smile, one act of kindness at a time. Years passed, and Mateo's story became a legend in the city of Barcelona. The tale of the humble fruit vendor and the football superstar spread far and wide, inspiring people across the globe. Mateo himself became a local icon. His corner was no longer just a place to buy fruit, but a symbol of resilience, community, and the power of kindness. People came from all walks of life to meet him, to shake his hand, to tell him how his story had touched their lives. And Mateo greeted them all with the same warmth and humility that had defined his life. He never forgot his roots, never lost touch with the struggles and the joys of the street vendor's life. Even as he aged and his hair turned gray, Mateo could be found at his cart every morning, setting up his display with the same care and pride he had always shown. His children and grandchildren joined him, learning the trade and the values that he embodied. And every year, on the anniversary of that fateful day, Lionel Messi would visit. No matter where in the world his career took him, he always made time to come back to that corner, to the man who had shown him the true meaning of greatness. The two men would sit together, sharing stories and laughter, marveling at how far they had come and how much they had learned from each other. They were an unlikely pair, the football superstar and the fruit vendor, but their bond was unbreakable. Messi never forgot what he had learned from Mateo, that true success isn't measured in goals scored or trophies won, but in the lives you touch, the difference you make. He carried that lesson with him always, using his platform and his influence to help others, to be a force for good in the world. And Mateo, for his part, never stopped being grateful for the gift Messi had given him. Not just the money or the fame, but the reminder of his own worth, his own potential to make a difference. He passed that gift on to everyone he met, and every interaction, every day of his life. He taught his children and his grandchildren, his fellow vendors and his customers, that every person has value, that every act of kindness matters. In the end, when Mateo's long and fruitful life drew to a close, it was that legacy that he left behind. Not a legacy of wealth or power, but a legacy of love, of community, of the endless ripple effect of one good deed. At his funeral, people came from all corners of the city and beyond to pay their respects. They came with tears and with laughter, with stories of how Mateo had touched their lives. And among them, standing quietly at the back, was Lionel Messi. He didn't speak, didn't draw attention to himself. But as he listened to the outpouring of love and gratitude for the man who had changed his life, he felt a deep sense of peace. Because he knew that Mateo's spirit would live on, and the lives he had touched, and the community he had built, and the story that would be told and retold for generations to come. The story of an ordinary man and an extraordinary act of kindness, and how together they had changed the world, one fruit at a time.